So we should be recording now. So they're going to take this idea and this notion of negro, and make it something powerful, right? I would liken it in a contemporary context, right? So how the whole debate of, well, if you say nigga with the A and not the ER, it's not a derogatory term, right? So how hip hop music was able to take this term nigger and turn it into something to where they're going to claim it and make it ours. We won't say nigga, it doesn't mean the same thing, but right, we're taking that term from you that was meant as something to be derogatory towards us, and we're going to put power behind it. So that's what Césaire and a lot of these negritude thinkers says, well, all these things that you try to put on us that say is negative, we're going to take it and we're going to make it a positive, right? So you don't want us to speak Creole, we're going to embed ourselves in this Creole language and we're going to make it ours, right? You don't like the poetry that we produce because you say it's uncivilized, so that's all we're going to do is produce this poetry that is centered in who we are, right? So this is what this notion of negritude is. It's not looking at us from the fringe or from the margins, but centering us in the conversation. And when I say us, I mean African people, right? People from the African diaspora. So this is this movement of negritude that Césaire is his overall project, right? He wants to change the way that the world views Black people on a global scale. So this is what he's up to as it pertains to negritude. So I'm taking a seminar on Fanon this semester. So Fanon was a mentee of Césaire. So I thought it would be wise to really know and understand Fanon is to engage Césaire, right? As you kind of discover and go deeper with their relationship, there's a rift that they have, and Fanon becomes very critical of the negritude movement. In fact, he says, where the negritude idea and this notion of negritude is trapped in this idea and this notion of race, right? Because if you're going to center everything around being Black, then it's limiting you in other ways of making communication, other ways of relation that is outside of race. So that's a critique that Fanon has placed on negritude. So being attentive to that, I'm like, well, let me find out what's going on with negritude. So let me read the architect of this movement. And I came across the book, The Discourse on Colonialism. For me personally, I love the way that the book is written. I love the way that Césaire goes about his argument. It's very clear, it's very straightforward. But he's also, to me, very sarcastic, sardonic, satirical, right? He kind of pokes fun out of a lot of the dominant ideas and undermines them. He's very Baldwinian in that notion. To me, Césaire and Baldwin's writing method is very similar, right? So that's why, to me, it's important that when we engage Césaire, we have to talk about this thing I call method, right? Also, this is a great way for you as scholars to up your bars as a writer, right? Just kind of give you some more tricks of the trade when it comes to producing your writer scholarship, and even thinking about taking these notions and applying them to your film production, right? How can you use a counter argument when producing film, right? What does that look like? How do you produce, or how do you use a counter narrative, or sorry, a counter argument when producing a narrative or a story, right? So start thinking about it. I'm trying to push you guys to start thinking about engaging readings from that capacity, right? Because when you look at that, it becomes a twofold project. One, reading to understand the information, and then two, reading to make yourself a better writer, right? Or a better producer of videos and things of that nature, of digital material. So at that point, I'm gonna put a pause in my speech. Those are the things that I found of interest. Again, you can either use those to engage the fishbowl, or just talk about what you feel is important. If I've called your name already and you've already fishbowled, please let me know. I do have the name of those who've passed already. So if you passed already, you cannot use your pass. But I don't think, it looks like you did. Okay. So we'll jump into it. I'm just gonna call names at random. And again, if you have not passed and you want to, let me know. If so, then we'll sign you up. So Brandon, how do you feel about fishbowling?
I already went the first time.
Thank you, man. Linda, how do you feel about fishbowling?
I already went the first time as well.
Okay. Sorry about that. Jade, how do you feel about fishbowling?
Yeah, I can do it.
Thank you, Jade. So you're good for the semester. Fionn, how do you feel about fish bowling?
Yeah, I can try.
Okay. Jamar, how do you feel about fish bowling?
I'm good. Yep.
Thank you, sir. And does anybody want to volunteer a fish bowl? Okay, I'm gonna call one more just because we have a pretty big class. Pablo, how do you feel about fish bowling?
I'm down.
Okay, cool. So we have Pablo, Jamar, excuse me, Fionn, and Jade are our 4 fish bowlers. You can talk about whatever you guys feel is important, or you could use some of my points of emphasis. Once that conversation is complete between the 4 of you guys, we'll open it up to the broader class conversation, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I could start off. So something I wrote was people are surprised when the tables turn on them or when the colonizer indicts them. And when I refer to the people, I mean like the people that look like the colonizer himself. You know, they're surprised when it's on them because it's strange. Yet it's like almost they're being given a taste of their own medicine, but they find it strange because they don't look like the ones who don't look like the Europeans. So they look like the Europeans, but they don't look like the ones that are normally being colonized. So I just found that super interesting because it relates to a lot of what we're experiencing now, you know, and it's almost like a brainwash. So I think like when you said when he used Hitler's references, I definitely think it supported his argument. So yeah, there's something I had to say about that. One question I had though was, and like you said, we're always asking questions, was the hypocrisy. What are the hypocrisy, like where is hypocrisy in the statement when they say Cortez discovering Mexico and Pizarro before Cusco? That's where I was just a little confused as far as hypocrisy.
Hey, Jay Mark, can you do me a favor, man? What page are you on? So on your document, it should be on the upper right-hand corner of the page number.
It was 32. I have to pull up. I'm just looking at my notes actually, so okay. I have to pull up the.
Let me see.
I think it was page 32.
Okay, let me see.
On the right.
You were saying colonialization and hypocrisy, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So right here. So pursuing my analysis, I find that hypocrisy is of recent date, that neither Cortez discovering Mexico from the top of the Great Teocalli, nor Piazzo before Cruzo, much less Marco Polo before Kambluk, claims that he is the harbinger of a superior order, that they kill, that they plunder, that they have helmets, lances, cupidities, that they slavering apologists came later, that the chief culprit in this domain is Christian pianetry, which laid down the dishonest equation. Christianity equals civilization, paganism equals savagery, from which there could not but ensure an abominable colonialist and racist consequences, whose victims were to be the Indians, the yellow peoples, and the Negroes. Okay, so and this really, Jamar, this kind of gets to really what Césaire is up to, and really kind of taps on and dance around his thesis, right? So he's trying to bring our attention to this notion of hypocrisy, right? And you can see this hypocrisy in the equations that he brings us to, right? Christianity equals civilization, paganism equals savagery, right?
Yeah.
But when you talk about Cortez in Mexico, if you know anything about Cortez was very vicious in the way that he conquered Mexico. Very violent, ruthless, and murderer.
Yeah, that's what I was assuming, like kind of like a Christopher Columbus situation almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And you know, on a little tidbit, one of my favorite shoes, right, are the Nike Cortez, and it's very popular in the indigenous community, right? So Nike has marketed the shoe to a community that was viciously decimated by Cortez, right? So that would be like them trying to sell a Thomas Jefferson basketball shoe, right? Like that's essentially what Nike has done with the Nike Cortez. But I can't front, it's a dope looking shoe. So he's bringing attention to this hypocrisy in the sense that colonialism is bringing civilization, Christianity is bringing civilization, but he's saying the way that they go about civilizing, that's where the hypocrisy lies.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense for sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak next. Basically, what I took from this reading is that he's just calling he's basically calling bullshit on how Europeans justified colonialism, and I also took it as they're trying to justify their colonialism and call it civilization by using Christianity and oh, we could do no wrong because it's evangelical, and Christianity could be seen as doing no wrong, and yeah, he's I felt like he was just you're that's bullshit. Everything you did, there was no good in it. I read a part where it said it mentions deceased morals, or the morals are deceased, no good, obviously no good came out of colonization. Everything they did to establish land and everything was by killing and taking away everything and wiping away religion and everything. Everything that they colonized.
Yeah, I think also what you said in the beginning of when you started talking, it kind of goes back to what I said about there's no way colonization is started from innocence. I think it's because we have to hold the colonizer accountable and find unravel the difference between colonization and civilization. They make you think that it is civilization, but it's really not. It's like I said, their way of brainwashing, which is crazy. So yeah, that goes back to the Hitler situation, Nazism, and the unfortunate recurring cycle of colonization. Yeah, so I totally agree with what you just said too.
Yeah, he definitely tries to differentiate both, and you can clearly see it in reading.
Yeah, and I think he also brings up what was it? Something about being deceitful. At first, Europe is deceitful. Or they may not think that they're deceitful at first. So that's what's kind of the trick that they kind of do.
Yeah, colonizers usually give out these excuses they colonized to bring Christianity to the land, or they're trying to help the people by modernizing and all that. But then Césaire said at one point that it's actually the colonized people who want to move forward, but the colonizers want to hold things back, which I found very just mind-blowing, because it's actually true.
Very good point, Fionn. And really, again, thinking about this thesis, you pretty much touch on it. If you look at how he closes out the essay, he lays out his thesis right there, right? So the final paragraph, the proof is that at present, it is the indigenous people of Africa and Asia who are demanding schools, and the colonialist Europe, which refuses them. That is, it is the African who is asking for ports and roads, and the colonialist Europe, which is niggardly on this score. So they're dragging their feet in a sense, right? That it is the colonized man who wants to move forward, and the colonizer who holds things back, right? So that's exactly what Fionn is talking about. So when in this notion of civilization, and this notion of progress, and this notion of being modern, right? As the colonized are trying to push for these notions, it's always the colonizer who is limiting these advancements, right? So very good point, Fionn.
So I actually wrote down the thing that Jamar was talking about, where he says that no one colonizes innocently. And so it's just it's one of those things I think of as well, where it's they can't exist in the same sentence. You cannot colonize innocently. And the author even says that a civilization that colonizes must already be a sick civilization. And one of the quotes that he brings up, Hitler saying, really stuck with me, because Hitler said something about that they're not aspiring for equality, but for domination. And that's something I see a lot nowadays as well. And the right, especially, they claim to like be going for equality as well. But whenever we push for something that we see like going for equality, they don't see it as that. They see it as oppression towards them. So it's almost like they don't know what true oppression is. So whenever we try to level the whole thing out, they see it as, oh no, that's not equality. You're oppressing us now, when it's really not the case.
Good point, Pablo. Just being attentive to the chat. Isaac asked the question: and I'm assuming is colonialism the modern version of gentrification? What do you guys think about that?
I think in this case, it might be a little different than gentrification, because this is like, because I feel like gentrification isn't it a smaller portion of, like, it's like changing a smaller community, right? So like Silver Lake turning into from something that was once super ghetto to something that's now a place where you could eat egg benedicts. Like it's just I think it's like a smaller portion of it, but it is still a form of colonization for sure. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to touch on that.
Yeah, what does other people think?
I feel like it's a very tricky situation. I think it's something that I've thought over a lot, especially living here in San Francisco, where it's very apparent here. Because like I grew up with, at least in my apartment for the last 20 years, I always grew up with families around the apartment in every building, and we got to know them really close. But throughout my childhood and throughout the years, they just slowly moved out one by one. And like as a kid, I was really confused as to why the reasons people would move out. And as I got older, I got to understand more of like socioeconomic and stuff, and realizing that the neighborhood was really changing, and not understanding why that was the case was really confusing. And like, although it's super tragic, some people who do try to defend gentrification, it's like, well, like the neighborhood was really sketchy back then, which is true. Even people from the neighborhood also admit that back then it was really sketchy, and now it's arguably safer. But at the extent of making the neighborhood safer, you also kick out families and these communities. So in reality, although the neighborhood is technically safer, was the intent really to make it safer for these, the original kind of families and communities, or was it for more white people or more privileged people to come in and invite them over instead? So I think it's less of a race issue than colonization was, although race is definitely a big component of gentrification, but I think it's more of a socioeconomic status rather, because I know that that I know some white families that have also been affected through gentrification as well, and they've been living there for years as well. But at the same time, it's mostly the predominantly like African American community and also the Latin American community that suffer as well.
So let me ask you this, because you claim that gentrification is not a race-based project, although there's some elements of race to it, just as in juxtaposition to colonialization. Would you assume that colonialization was a race-based project? And I'm asking that to the class.
I was wondering if I could like go back to a little bit of what Kenny said. He said something about how like before neighborhoods were considered more sketchy. And I think that itself can be tied directly to a race thing, because not only are they lower socioeconomically, but they're also considered more sketchy. When you see a Black person or when you see a Latino person walking down the street, you're automatically like told to be a little bit more weary than if you were to see a white person. So just automatically groups, Latino communities and Black communities are seen as sketchier, and once they're gone, then the neighborhood will be seen as safer just because of their race. And I think that's very similar to what was happening with colonialism and colonizations, because they came to these countries, they came to America, they saw a lot of Native Americans, and because they had already deemed them through like science and research as like savages, and they were able to say that these are unsafe and these are dangerous people, and by like getting rid of them and killing them and replacing them with white people and colonizers, and they're able to see these places as more civilized. So I think like the way that, I'm sorry, I'm out of breath, but the way that like gentrification and colonialism are very close, and all of these same things keep popping up and up again. So that's all.
Yeah. No, that's
Going back to what you said though about like safe, quote unquote safe. I've had like friends like who live in Echo Park and still live there who say they're okay with the gentrification because now that they see more white people around, they feel safer, which I don't know how I felt about that. It was just like, it's weird because that doesn't really determine what's safe and what's not. But yeah, it's just like a perfect example of what you just said.
Yeah. And then two, who is deserving of protection, right? Whose bodies can feel safe, right? That's another question, because oftentimes, right, my brother lives in Oakland. So I spent a good amount of time in Oakland. There, you could call the police. It may take them 30 minutes to get to somewhere that's 5 minutes down the street, right? So that bodies, those people in that area are not deserving to feel safe. But if you call, you know, some of the affluent areas of the North Bay or the East Bay, right, the police will get there in 5 minutes, right? So then who is worthy of safety? And then also to problematize this idea of safety, right? By default, these areas which are highly Black and brown, calling the police, it infringes on their safety, right? So the police presence does not make them feel safe. So that whole notion of safety is an idea that needs to be problematized from the space of one, who is deserving to feel safe in a race-based society, and then two, what does safety mean when the people who are supposed to be ensuring the safety are a threat to your community, right? Kenny, were you going to say something before I jumped in?
Yeah, I just want to say, I guess, I'm sorry to use the term safe. What I meant to really say is that now in the neighborhood, I'm noticing more resources available to help out the community, but those resources weren't there prior to like more white people coming in. So I guess that's what I truly meant to say. Not really the term safe, but there's more resources available back then, and like more kind of like these organizations that help out. I'm just like a bit frustrated or like upset that that wasn't always there when the community really needed it, but it is now, I guess, maybe a little too late.
And you know, Kenny, I think I'm glad that you made the mistake of saying safe, because I think it's something that needs to be talked about when we look at this notion of gentrification, right? Like it has to come up in conversation, because that is one of the premier excuses that is used when talking about the authenticity of gentrification, right? So it may have been a Freudian slip, but I'm glad it came out that way, because it's something I think that we needed to kind of tangle with. Any other, so at this point, we'll just open it up to a class discussion about the reading. Any other ideas? Thank you, Brett, for the E40 documentation on gentrification.
Yeah, it's really good. I saw a few years ago. It really touches on the restructuring of real estate zoning in the Bay Area and the push by police to get, to really criminalize the Black and brown community in their own neighborhoods, which they lived in for years. So it's really good.
Fall asleep.
I was gonna say that it kind of, because this whole time I was kind of thinking of Levittown and like the redlining, how that really ties into a lot of what modern colonization, which is gentrification today, because certain people, certain communities were pushed out and weren't allowed this this nice place with like a new conventional utilities and like a nice TV. Like they were pushed out to the city, and now it's like, okay, now those who were pushing out these communities to the city are now trying to push those communities out of the city and over where, so for some people, it's always been a choice to live in like to live wherever they want, and then other communities it's been not a choice at all. So.
And I think also, you know, thinking about how Césaire would contemplate this idea of safety, right, as it pertains to gentrification, I would argue, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, Césaire would probably say that the people who are being gentrified are the ones who would need to feel safety or to need to have some type of apparatus to make them feel safe. Just as I would assume, and what Césaire is saying, it's the colonized who would need to feel safety from the onslaught of the colonizer, right? Because they're the ones who are doing all the murdering. They're the ones who are doing all the raping. They're the ones who are doing all the plundering, right? So when we talk about safety, the real community who should feel the need to try to, you know, make themselves feel safe are the communities that are being marginalized and the communities that are being infringed upon, right? So I'm curious also, like, so what are some of you guys' thoughts of the way that he used Hitler? Hitler is like probably one of the most polarizing figures in modern society. And I think it's very, especially in, mind you, he wrote this in 1955, okay? So think about just the temporal standpoint from when he's producing this and invoking Hitler, right? What are y'all thoughts on that? I know J. Mar touched on it a little bit, but I'm curious to hear what you guys thought about the way he used Hitler. Do you think it was effective? So, for example, on page 37, the start of the first full paragraph, he says, I have talked a great deal about Hitler because he deserves it. He makes it possible to see things on a large scale and grasp the fact that capitalist society at its present stage is incapable of establishing a concept of the rights of all men, just as it has proved incapable of establishing a system of individual ethics. Whether one likes it or not, at the same end of the blind alley, that is Europe. I mean the Europe of Adander, Schumann, Bidultz, and a few others. There is Hitler. At the end of capitalism, which is eager to outlive its day, there is Hitler. At the end of the formal humanism and philosophic reunification, there is Hitler. So what do y'all think as far as his invoking of Hitler? Do you think it's effective? What is it?
I was actually on those same pages, 36, 37, because I can't help but when we do these readings, I can't help but try to relate it to like how we're living now to, you know, just kind of, you know, making correlations. And yeah, I really liked like at 36 when he's like, you know, people are surprised, they become indignant. They say, how strange, but never mind, it's Nazism, it will pass. And they wait and they hope and they hide the truth from themselves. And then that whole section, including what you wrote, I couldn't help but just kind of think of like, this is kind of how Trump is used, is sort of like, oh, it's Trumpism, it'll pass, he's an anomaly, we just got to get past it, guys. Yeah. And you don't realize like, no, dude, like we were in Trumpism before Trump, like, and I couldn't help but just sort of like reflect on that whole thing. So, and like, again, that part that you read, especially in the beginning, that like, I use him because he deserves it. He makes it possible to see things on a large scale. And I couldn't help but like, especially now, because of course we're so close to the election, I just couldn't help but like, wow, yeah. So I think it was really effective in his reading, especially with what he was trying to say. I really enjoyed it. I just couldn't help like, wow, it's sort of like the same thing. Like at the end of all this, there's just another Trump because we're not, fixing the real or addressing the real issues.
Yeah, you hit it on the head, Crystal. Also, is that a Pulp Fiction shirt? So, sure.
It's actually a Supernatural shirt, but it is a Pulp Fiction reference. Yeah.
But nah, I mean, and I think you hit it on the head, right? Like these personalities that we like to label them as outliers, right? But there's a reason why these personalities are as effective as they are. And this is what Césaire is trying to get us to understand, right? It's like, yeah, Hitler was one motherfucker, but he moved the whole nation. So what's going on for all those who followed him to be able to take up that task, right? Just as Trump is one motherfucker, but we have a whole bunch of Trump people who move in the same vein that he does, right? So it's not, we cannot just place it on him, on Hitler, Trump, whoever the case may be, right? If they can move a whole society, then that says that there's a larger issue at play here. So that's a very astute observation. And then, so when I talk about making an analysis to what's going on today, Crystal just gave us a pinpoint example of what that looks like and what that should sound and feel like, okay? I don't know, for me, the way that he starts this off is probably the coldest, 24 bars that you could come off in an essay, man. Like, talk about starting your shit off talking shit. A civilization that proves incapable of solving the problems it creates is a decadent civilization. A civilization that chooses to close its eyes to its most crucial problem is a stricken civilization. A civilization that uses its principles for trickery and deceit is a dying civilization. If that is not talking some shit, I don't know what is. I mean, and then so if we were to do what Crystal has done, what does that say for America? I mean, so we're in 2020, I spent my whole summer, because of the death of George Floyd, because of the death of Ahmaud Arbery, because of the death of Breonna Taylor, corporations were looking to have somebody come in and talk about what's going on, help make sense of this issue. So I've been doing work with Apple. I've been doing work with this company named called Samsara, right? And it's like, you can't expect me to come in one fell swoop and to fix the race problem in your company when this country has been dealing with racism since the inception of this country, right? So in a civilization that proves itself incapable of solving the problems it creates, right? This idea of the race issue of what Du Bois calls the Negro problem, this is something that this country cultivated and created. It has yet to be able to resolve this issue. So according to Césaire, this is a decadent civilization, right? Closing its eyes to its most crucial problems. One of the reasons why we have not been able to address the racial issue is because they want to turn a blind eye to the racial issue, right? When you have conversations around race, one of the first things that comes up is, I don't see color. Turning a blind eye to the issue at hand, right? Talking about our civilization. Civilization that uses its principles for trickery and deceit is a dying civilization. Our principles are what? Liberty, justice, freedom. There's a large population of our civilization that don't have those principles. The fact that this so-called European civilization is Western, as it has been shaped by 2 centuries of bourgeoisie rule, is incapable of solving the 2 major problems to which its existence has given rise: the problem of the proletariat and the colonial problem. That's how you start an essay. And so I asked you guys, what is a discourse, right? And I wrote that shit down. So a discourse is it's an argumentation, right? By default, by definition, a discourse is to argue your point. So he's letting you know already what I'm arguing. This notion of the West, this idea of civilization, like Jay said, is bullshit, right? And he uses a lot more fluffy and articulate words to say that, but at the core of what he's saying is all of this is bullshit. It's hypocrisy, right? So what do you guys think about, actually, let's do this. Let's take a break. We'll come back at 1:05. We'll do some breakout groups. And then after the breakout groups, we'll discuss as a whole, and then we'll call it a day. So log back in at 1:05. Cool? So that, I'm sorry. So the boomerang effect, that's actually question number 2. So those are actually 2 separate questions. Okay, so your first question is, what, according to Césaire, of course, all this is going through the reading that we've done. So according to Césaire, what does colonialism do to the colonizer? The second question, dealing with this notion of the boomerang effect of colonialism as it pertains to the Baldwinian notion of white innocence or the maintenance of white innocence, and this idea of colonialism equaling thingification. So again, question 1, what does the system of colonialism do to the colonizer? 2, dealing with the boomerang effect of colonialism, and as that relates to the Baldwinian notion of white innocence, and then the idea of colonialism equaling thingification. Does everybody understand the discussion topics? Okay. So I'm gonna break you guys out into the breakout rooms. I'll give you guys 7 minutes to discuss, and then we'll come back together. Please assign a spokesperson for your group, so that way we'll just be rolling when we get back together as a class, and then we'll have this conversation, and then we'll end with that. So I'm gonna put about 4 to 5 of you guys in each room, okay? And again, please sign that that spokesperson, because it just helps things roll a lot faster. Golden, can you join the group for me, please? And we are almost back. Okay, so I don't know who's all was in group 1, but I know that Thelonious was in group 1. So whoever was in the group with Thelonious, whoever your spokesperson was, we'll start with that group.
Dokie. So for our group, we kind of all, like went around asking each other, what does colonialism due to the colonizer? Uh, Basically, we all came to an agreement that it really doesn't do anything but what it is. You know, gives them control, gives them power, gives them already what they've been, you know, searching for, and trying to put the other people or community to do for them. That's primarily what they're all about. More power to them means, you know, more control, and that's basically the ultimate goal for them. And on the boomerang effect of colonialism, as it pertains to the Baldwinian notion of white innocence, we kind of agree that it went back to the previous statement you were talking about, where they turn a blind eye, like the boomerang effect. It goes back to them, but they're like, oh no, we don't see color, we don't know what you're talking about, man. Like this, we're innocent in all ways. Like basically, they're just washing their hands whenever they can, and they're not gonna take any accountability for any of their actions or anything that they do, because their point is justified by their Christian beliefs or whatever they might be throwing at, you know, to the people to give to them. And then once they're done with them, they're like, okay, we're out, it's fine. And then on the third one, colonialism equals thingification, I think it does equal that. It is, that's basically what you know, colonialism is. You know, you're treating a community as a thing. You provide them with food, you provide them with education, you provide them with you know, a certain religion or protection, and then once you're done, like, but the thing is, you never treat them as an equal or as a person. You just treat them as a thing, as territory. Basically, Carla made a great point to us. Puerto Rico, for instance, they're a part of their territory. They're not a state. They're nothing. So it's sad, because that's how I feel colonialism equals thingification, and that's what we got all from it. And yeah, like it's insane that like that's how things are viewed nowadays, or even back then, honestly.
Good job, group one. So group two, Golden was in that group. I don't know who the spokesperson was, but whoever the spokesperson for Golden's group, you guys are up.
Okay, so what our group was talking about was, I guess we kind of tied 1 and 2 a little together, because they kind of, they fall under the same topic a little bit. Basically, we were saying that what colonialism does to the colonizer is that it normalizes things, and it poisons like the community. And it makes things like everything seem normal and everything, and you become desensitized. The colonizer becomes desensitized to these ways, and then it leads to them thinking that their way is the best way, and that which I think goes kind of into the boomerang effect, where it's like we're better, so we're like everything that we do is going to be great, and everyone has to conform to that. Anyone we run into, and anyone that's different, you know, they either conform or we criticize their ways, and you know, do all these terrible things. And I think, you know, a lot of it does have to come with, I think Golden was saying, like with white innocence, where they're like, again, where, you know, they want to wash their hands of like all the negative things they did, because they don't want to, they want to live in ignorance. It basically creates ignorance, is what colonialism does, and it harbors it. And let's see, oh, I'm stumped on the thingification, but I think it kind of had to do with a lot of the same things. It was a little confusing to me. We didn't really go in depth in that one, but we kind of talked about like the same.
Yeah, they're all in the same vein. There's a thread between each question, and I did that on purpose. What I'll do is I'll let the rest of the groups answer because they may give you more insight to in this idea of thingification. Thank you, Golden Group, and thank you, Tori. Group 3 was Fion's group. I don't know if she was a spokesperson, but whoever is in Fion's group and that's that spokesperson, it's on you.
So I'll quickly answer the third question. Basically, like how we associated it with was like thing, not a human, dehumanization, not treating a human as a human and treating it like an animal or thing. And like also like I think the past like readings we did, I think it was like othering people, you know, like that same association. So that's like how we, you know, like broke it down. The first question, we felt that like colonialism kind of like boosts their ego no matter how much power they like, no matter what they do, like the more that they colonize, the more power they establish, and like power is bound to like boost anyone's ego and like, you know, like give them more confidence to do what they keep doing. Which I kind of felt like the second question, I agreed with what Tori and with what everyone was saying about like, you know, like no, Tori made a good point, and I like had it in my head, but I can't think of it right now. But I'm trying to think. Sorry. Sorry, I can't like think of an answer for the second question.
I put for Tori, she mentioned the like desensitized. That was one of the things in her what she mentioned.
Oh yeah.
Helps you.
Yeah, that's like just being totally unaware of like the harm of like all the damage that they've caused, you know, like thinking and having that mindset like, oh, this is like, oh, like we're successful now, like I mean like we've done all these horrible things, but like they don't look at it that way, you know. Desensitization. Yeah.
Thank you, Jay. For the fourth group, Drew was in that group. Again, he may not be the spokesperson, but whoever was in Drew's group and is the spokesperson, it's on you.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so we were talking about, I just really liked the third question because like, so when you think of, when I at least hear of thingification, the first thing that comes to my mind is objectification. And like typically today we hear objectification, we hear like discourse about like the objectification of women. And so like when you think about objectification, like it's really just defined as like degrading something to the point where they're no longer a thing, they're just a thing, you know what I mean? And so when we talk about colonialism, we're talking about the objectification of like an entire population. And so like to that regard, it kind of begins to treat the population as just like a means, and in this case it's, you know, like a means of production. And so we were just talking about like how when like your entire like how do I put it, like when your economic like system revolves around like objectifying a people and a population, like what it does to colonizers, it makes them dependent on them and like on the colonized people. And so it begins to kind of like feed back, you know, so like it allows for a lot more justification, at least in the mind of the colonizer. And it really makes them like more, how would I put it, like warmongering, just because like they're more willing to put up with the atrocities that they're committing.
Very good point. I really like the notion that you brought up of the dependency, right? Because in a certain regard, if you look at it from that standpoint, they are leeching off of their colonized entity, right? So they are dependent on their production to sustain themselves. That's a really good point. For group number 5 is Matthew was in the group. I don't know, again, if he is the spokesperson, but whoever was in Matthew's group and you are the spokesperson, it's on you.
Yes, I am the spokesperson for the group. So for the first question, we were talking about how like colonialism is like it's always based behind like a duty, or like they give it for a reason, like, oh, like it's for your own good or it's for like the benefit of something else. But in reality, it really just shows how colonizers are like brutal, and it shows the true nature almost. How like they start off like saying like they're Christians, or they're coming up to like civilized people, but then they act like in the most uncivilized way, like raping and murdering and using like indigenous people for their own benefits. And then that kind of goes into the second question, how we were talking about, because with all like the atrocities colonizers have done, and then now like we just like choose to forget it, or like, oh, Christopher Columbus, he's like a hero, like he discovered America, but like you don't recognize all of the disgusting things that he's done. And then they refuse to look at it, because once they acknowledge that what they did was wrong, then like, oh, they're no longer the Christians, they're no longer the civilized people, and that they're just hiding behind this like fake history, that what they did was for a good reason, like they did it, like it's a manifest destiny, or like it's a divine destiny that they're supposed to do. Like in like the Bible, it says like you're supposed to spread out the word of Christ, but like the way that they did it was so horrible and horrific that they're no longer Christians doing it. And then that again, it goes into the third question, because the colonizers didn't treat any of the colonizees as things, or like they didn't treat them as people, they treated them as things. Like they were just a part of their duty, that they didn't like, oh, they're children, or they're animals, and we have to make them into something more. And it goes back with dignification, because you're not seeing them as people, you're seeing them as like just another like a number, or like a thing you have to do. It's like a chore almost for them, that they don't want to do it, but it's their duty to do it, that they have to do it.
Perfect. Thank you. And then for our last group, group 6, it was Brett was in the group. I don't know if he's the spokesperson, but whoever's in that group.
Yeah, I'm the spokesperson. So like you mentioned, we first realized that all 3 of these questions are it doesn't matter which way you arrange them. They all tie in together. But for the first question is, being a part of this environment of colonialism is it's an environment that they create themselves, and therefore at some point they fear their own environment. And the best example we came up with was white flight. Create an establishment of city to people to live in. Hey, someone that's not us tries to move in. Okay, we're going to go somewhere else and create something else further away. Best example, the suburbs. The second question is the boomerang effect. And we came into the idea of that they become a victim of their own environment. And the best example that I came across, that I actually read an article on Tom Brokaw on his derogatory comments about Hispanic people. It's actually called white flight, white magic. And it's basically saying, well, if that's what I said negative or derogatory about you, it's not my fault, because it's your fault, because you didn't know how to interpret it as me misunderstand. It was of you misunderstood me and saying what it is. So it's how they kind of play the victim of themselves. And I have the link here because I was reading it again earlier today, but there was also a documentary on it, how like it's this cycle of playing victim. If they did something wrong, somehow they wash their hands clean of it. It's your fault. And third, the thingification is like Crystal said, it's like the snake that eats itself. It makes it's an animal that creates the society, or a concept of what things should be for only people that are accepted to be part of this colonialism. And being part of the colonization is that ultimately it creates fear and it's panic, and it ends up consuming itself, and it pulls people further apart.
Man, you guys really hit the nail on the head. What I do want to do though, like just kind of bring it back to the text, right? So especially when we talk about the first question, what does the colonization do to the colonizer? On page 35, he lays that out. We must study how colonization works to decivilize the colonizer, to brutalize him in the true sense of the word, to degrade him, to awaken him to buried instincts, to covetousness, violence, race hatred, and moral relativism, right? So these are some of the things that Césaire says, the way that colonialism plays out for the colonizer himself, right? It decivilizes even the colonizer, right? So while I'm saying I'm treating you this way because you're not civilized, for you to treat somebody like that shows a level of inhumanity, right? It brutalizes him, right? So you cannot enact brutality without being brutal yourself, right? He said, it awakens him to buried instincts, right? And what do you think he means by these buried instincts?
Well, kind of like how they all tie into each other. I feel like that kind of ties into the boomerang effect. Because on 41, you know, he says, you know, they prove that colonization, I repeat, dehumanizes even though civilized man. And then later it says, that the colonizer, who in order to ease his conscience gets into the habit of seeing the other man as an animal, accustoms himself to treating him like an animal, and tends objectively to transform himself into an animal. And as a result, this boomerang effect that they were talking about. So it's like, while, you know, creating this animal, this beast that you're afraid of and you're brutalizing, you become that beast. You are, and that's kind of like, I felt what he was talking about when he was talking about colonialism affects the colonizer as well. Is it like it turns you into the thing that you're most fearful of, these savage beasts? And that's kind of how I was like tying all of them together.
Yo, Chris, I don't know what you have for breakfast, but keep eating that shit because it's working for you. So remember how I mentioned that Frantz Fanon was a student of Césaire, right? And so one of Frantz Fanon's most famous books is Wretched of the Earth. In chapter 2 of Wretched of the Earth, he has it's called, the chapter's titled On Violence. So he's writing exclusively on this idea and this notion of violence. So towards the latter part of that chapter, he starts to talk about how the colonizer brutalizing the colonized, right, him enacting that violence, the effect that it has on his mental capacity and how it erodes him, and how the way that he relates to his children in his home, he lashes out at his children the way he lashes out at the colonized, right? He talks to his wife the way that he talks to the colonized woman that he brutalizes on a quotidian, on a daily basis, right? So Fanon picks up this project that Césaire starts that Crystal articulated perfectly, right? So this idea that the animal that you're brutalizing, you become that very same animal. And this is what Fanon is up to when he gets into Wretched of the Earth, chapter 2 on violence, right? So yes, it's the thread that runs through all of that. So we could take that into a modern day contemporary context, right? The brutality that the police enact is also signs of their brutality themselves, right? So I don't know if you guys noticed, but this whole summer, New York PD have been committing suicide at a very egregious rate. Look it up. If you think I'm lying, do the research. I could be bullshitting y'all, you know what I'm saying? I could just making this shit up. But do the research. You see that New York PD has been committing suicide at just an enormous rate. Again, you cannot do these atrocities and not be impacted yourself by these things, right? And again, I'm going out on a limb and saying this, but I would assume that the dirt that they do on a regular basis, is hard to carry that on your conscience and live a wholesome life. So a lot of them may be choosing to opt out by taking their own lives, right? I don't think that's far-fetched. Go ahead, Tyler.
I said, shit, you'd be surprised.
You'd be surprised, right? So that's all I have for you guys today. I will say this, man. Again, as you guys know, this is my first time in the TV, video, and film department. I really enjoy the interaction I've had with you guys so far, man. You guys are a lot more in tune with the critical assessment of the structures of power than I assumed it would be, just because of the conversation that I had with the dean, the chair of the department. She was really like emphasizing how she wanted to engage in social justice conversations, as if this is a conversation that does not happen in this department. But the way that you guys picked up the task of having these conversations that are very difficult and could be very sensitive, man, I want to tip my hat to you guys. And it does make for the conversation, our time together, to be really fruitful and impactful. And for me, not boring, right? Because when you engage, it makes the time, one, go faster, and it's not me just talking and me talking. That shit can get boring, right? So I really do enjoy the time. I really do appreciate your guys' insight. Again, as I mentioned, right, I'm in a PhD program. A lot of the themes that we're covering here in this course, we cover in my PhD program. And the average student in my PhD program are not coming with your guys' level of analysis. I'm gonna just be 100 with you, right? Like the boomerang effect, how colonialism plays out on the colonized, those are topics that they struggle with, and they're in a PhD level, right? They have masters already. You guys are still in your undergrad. So just again, I just say this to say to you, you are on the right path, right? And you're doing work that will change the world, to put it in not a hyperbole, like to put it very succinctly, it's no bullshit. Like this type of mental activity can change the way that this world looks, especially for what you guys seek to do in your projected fields, right? You're in media. Media makes the world move. I could talk about 1,000 books. Ain't nobody reading that shit. They'll watch a movie in a minute, right? So what you guys, the projects that you guys seek to pick up, and the information that you're gaining from this is going to be dynamic, and it's going to really make for a shift in the way that culture is perceived within the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm not saying that just to say it. That's how I genuinely believe, right? And that's why the energy that I come to with this class is for that reason, because shit's got to change, right? Like the status quo can no longer be the status quo, right? And you guys are in the positions to be those agents that will change the status quo, right? And don't take that task lightly. Don't devalue or diminish or minimize your ability to be that change agent, right? One of my favorite quotes from Tupac is, I might not be the one that changed the world, but I will spark the brain that changes the world, right? And whether it be you doing the changing of the world yourselves or your work sparks the brain that changed the world, that's going to produce that change, right? And that's the task that I take up, and that's the task that I ask you to take up as you continue to do your work. With that, enjoy your weekend. I'll post the video